There's two things that I typically like to have on hand when I do all of my motion tracking. Really only one thing you need, which is obviously the footage, but the second thing that I go ahead and do is have a JPEG sequence of that same footage so that I can use it as a background object to go ahead and start adding any 3D elements into it. I use Octane Render, so it's just my render of choice, so it's easy for me to kind of throw everything in there and start navigating in 3D. But anyways, that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that you're going to want to do is have your C4D panel open. Make sure that all of your stuff is at default, layouts at startup, and you have your tracker selected. Go ahead and select Motion Tracker. This Motion Tracker window is going to pop up right here, and you're going to notice that you have a bunch of options: footage, lens profile, all of this stuff that you could fill in if you have all of the details for your, if you wanted to fill in a lens profile for your actual camera, right? I don't ever do that. So I will literally go in here really quick. I'm going to navigate to my desktop. I think I've got a new folder. All right, sorry guys, got lost there for a minute, couldn't find my folder. All right, so we've got Gym Clip here. That's the one that I'm going to be using and throwing in there. Now the first thing you'll notice is that the resampling automatically sets it down to 33%. For motion tracking, we want to have as much detail as we possibly can, so go ahead and bump that up to 100%. If you go into your 2G tracking, typically you'll notice that you have your automatic tracking, your manual tracking tab, and some options. I learned this trick from Andre Lebrov. So if you're not following him, you just, I don't even know what to tell you. I usually go into my options and I'll set a default pattern size to about 25. And then for the most part, I'm leaving the vast majority of all of this other stuff on default. Since we're doing all automatic tracking, I might push the number of tracks up to like 500, depending on the complexity of the scene and how much I really want it to stick. You can play with this number anywhere from 500 and upwards to, like, you know, 1500 or however high you want to go, right? I mean, it can get real detailed, but just keep in mind, the higher you go, the more complex the, you know, the tracking is, and the longer it's going to take. So anyways, something like 500 is fine. Let's go ahead and hit that, and then go ahead and hit auto track. I do my create auto tracks after. You're going to notice in the bottom left hand corner right here that it's processing all of the frames and information, and it's going to run it through a few processes before it finalizes. Alright, so our track is finished, and you'll notice if you scrub the timeline, you've got all these tracks sticking to your object. Cool, looks good. Some of them are slipping, some of them aren't. Now here's what you can do, which helps out a lot, is I go ahead in mine and I select my error threshold and I place it down to somewhere around 30%. That kills a lot of the tracking markers. Sometimes I'll even push it, you know, really low if I really want to kill the ones that I feel like aren't sticking strong, and it gets rid of a lot of the ones that are slipping. So another cool trick. Now this is the big trick right here. On top of setting your error threshold to something low that kills a lot of the tracks, you can go ahead and create auto tracks in specific areas on the timeline. So what that means is, go ahead. This was the Andre Lebrov trick. This is the sweet sauce right here. So this is everything, you guys. So go ahead on frame 0. Go ahead and select create auto tracks. Push it forward to, I don't know, frame 24. Create auto tracks. And on every, you know, 24 frames or so, we're going to create all of those additional 500 auto tracks. So now 80, now 104, create. All right, cool. So what it does is it goes ahead and at those interval points, it lets Cinema 4D know that you've created additional tracking points that you want to be algorithmically calculated as you're passing through your track. So you can see those things popping up as you scrub the timeline, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead over to our 3D solve. And we're going to just simply, if you had the camera settings, you had the focal length, all of your sensor information, which you can find out on all of your cameras online. But for the case of this, we have none of that information, so we're just going to run a 3D solver based on the tracking data that we have. So we're going to run our solver and let it do its work. And again, you're going to notice at the bottom right left-hand corner, after we select that it's running our 3D solver, and it's going to run through, again, yet a few processes before you're done. So it might take a minute, grab some coffee, and come on back. So you'll notice that our solve finished. Now here's what's cool, is if we open up our motion tracker now, we have a solved camera and we have our auto features. And if if I pull that open, it shows us all of those tracking markers, and I can literally scrub all the way down, and every single one of those becomes a tracking marker, a potential null that we could use to bring into After Effects later, which is really cool. So just wanted to show you that. So now when I scrub the timeline, you'll notice that, yeah, everything looks the same, but if I click off here anywhere, it's going to scrub and show me all of those tracking markers and how they're looking and sticking within the camera, and how the scene looks dependent on all of those tracking markers, which gives us a really good idea on which nulls that we might want to use or bring into After Effects a little bit later. Now you'll notice our camera's off. Now if I go ahead and deselect the timeline and I go right here, you'll notice that my plane is completely off, and that's fine. If I hop out of my camera really quick and I take a look at it, we can kind of see how it's looking based on the tracking points of the object. You can kind of see, the dude sitting there. The camera's all jacked up, our plane is off, and it's gonna make for a rough time trying to add 3D objects. So like if I added a cube, and then I hop back out of that camera, you can see that the cube populates right where the camera is. It just makes for a world of pain. So the best thing that you want to do, just like in After Effects, is you're going to normalize your environment. You want to make sure that everything's set to scale and all of that stuff. So, alright, so now that we have all of that information in, if you go back to your motion tracker, the first thing that I always like to do is I like to lock my solved data so nothing gets jacked up and nothing gets moved and messed up. And then the final thing that I like to do personally is to have a reconstruction. So I like to generate a point cloud of that information, so that when I'm adding 3D objects, I can actually see things in my background when I hop out of my solved camera, and I can look at that point cloud data to kind of place things around if I need to. So if you go ahead and select Generate Point Cloud, you'll notice yet again we've got in the lower left hand side, we've got some operations running, and as soon as that's done, we'll be able to see our point cloud. So we'll be right back. Alrighty guys, so our point cloud is finished now. So now this is what's really cool. If I go ahead and I hop out of my solved camera, I can see that point cloud information, and it gives you a little bit more information about where you can place an object in 3D space. So if I wanted to track something, not only can I see the motion tracker now, but I can actually see these point clouds, so it gives me a better understanding of how those angles might fall if you were trying to track something to his face or to his arm. It gives you some really good information and data that way. So just a cool little tip and trick and technique to add to your arsenal there. So if you go back into your scene, this is where we're going to go ahead and start adding a little bit more detail to normalize our scene. Alright guys, once we have all of that set up, the first thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and come over here to our motion tracker and select tracker tags and position constraint. We want to tell Cinema 4D where our floor plane is. So if we select off, we can see all of those points and see which one we might want to target. So I'm going to select this guy right here next to the tape. So if I select my position constraint tag again, you'll notice this little yellow dot in the center screen. I'm going to drag him over, and it should kind of connect there. So now this is going to be our position or our world orientation, our 0, 0, right? So this is our floor plane, or where everything's going to spawn from here on out from a 3D standpoint. And the same thing for After Effects. When we bring this null into After Effects, that's where everything, all of those three-dimensional objects are going to spawn from, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do, or the only thing left that we're going to do, is we're going to add a couple vector constraints. So if you right-click and go over here to your tracker tags, go over to your vector constraints, it's going to add a vector constraint. Now, in a perfect world scenario, guys, you're going to want to make sure that you have the exact dimensions. So like when you're out, shooting all of this stuff, make sure you get some reference information, like mathematically. I'm looking at my brother here, or the subject, and I'm kind of just gonna have to eyeball this. What I did is I took my vector constraint and I found what I think is going to be what's going this way, right? So we got our z-axis here, what we're gonna have, y is going straight up, x is going this way. And you could even call that X or Z, depending on how you're looking at it, right? So I'm going to select axes, and I'm going to select X, and then I'm going to hit length known, and I'm just going to put in maybe like 1.5 feet. Now the crazy cool thing about Cinema 4D is if you type in 1.5 feet and then you hit enter, it's going to convert everything to centimeters for you, and then you're pretty much good to go, right? So if I go back now and I look at how my camera is looking and how it's calibrated, we've got the camera positioning a little bit more honest to where we're supposed to be, right? It's not as sideways and all jacked up. The camera's sitting a little bit lower, which is a little bit more realistic of how close I was probably shooting to him. And what we could do now is go in and add another vector constraint, right? So this is where we can now tackle the, what do we do? The X, now we're doing the Z. We hit length known, and we're like, 6 inches, axis Z. And then we go back out, select our camera. Now here's something that happens quite a bit, is it'll reverse the axes. So the best thing to do is just reverse that back, and then everything should be back to where it's supposed to be. So anyways, there you go. You've got your camera somewhat tracked. We've got all of these tracking markers on here, and we can kind of go ahead and begin to get started. You can kind of see the floor is looking right. The plane's looking a little bit more honest to how it would sit in reality and in space, right? So that's good. And now you can go ahead and spawn something and see how it's looking. So if I go ahead and add like a cube here, you got a cube here. It looks a little big, but if I cube sitting, and if I go ahead and hit play, I can see my cube to that plane where we set our position constraint is sticking perfectly, and it ain't going nowhere. That's a pretty solid track, you guys. Like, that ain't going anywhere. And that is what we're going to be bringing over into After Effects in order to use as a tracker moving forward. Now here's the crazy cool thing, is I can start tracking things in 3D space and start moving things around and bringing all that and rendering it back out and bringing it over into After Effects. I can just bring over the null and not even have to use the 3D camera tracker in After Effects, and it works flawless. So just to show you guys that quick tip and technique, let's go ahead and do that. All right, cool. So we have our plane constraint down there. Let's see, where are we? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna select one of those auto features. Okay. Now the crazy cool thing is you have to kind of. I haven't learned how to do this yet to find the actual tracker. So what I did is I copy this guy, and then I bring. I'll bring him out. So copy, and then outside of that, I just select paste. And then I change his name to null, or you can change it to camera tracker 1. And you can do this for multiples, right? Now here's the trick. You got to go ahead and right click. You got to go ahead down to your render tags and select an external compositing tag. This allows you to bring that into After Effects and hit File, Save Project, and then you could do this a couple different ways. I think the old method was if you went in here and in your save options under your render settings, there was a compositing project file that you can hit save, select After Effects, or Nuke, or what Motion Fusion, whatever, select 3D data, and then hit save project file, and you'd get an AEC file, which was an After Effects composition file that would come directly into After Effects and give you all of the 3D information. So I'm going to show you the way that I like to do it, though, is to go ahead and file, import directly inside of After Effects. I'm going to import my Cinema 4D file. The only other thing that you'll notice, I've created a composition with the actual same footage that we use to track over in Cinema 4D, and then I've got a one of Edward O.V.'s little circle illustration looping files here. So we're going to go ahead and use this as our 3D asset. So anyways, going back to our composition, we have our motion or our Cinema 4D file. Go ahead and drag that file on top of your footage. You're going to notice that it does some crazy stuff and shows all of the points and the tracking markers from the Cinema 4D file. Go ahead down to the bottom where the commands area is and select extract. From here, you're going to get your solved camera, and you're going to get the camera tracker, the null that we created over there in Cinema 4D. Go ahead and hide your Cinema 4D layer. And now that you have that, you've got your null, we can go ahead and bring any 3D element out there, and we can start arranging things in 3D space. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the circles layer on, drop it in, and then you're going to notice that all of this happens. Select that as a 3D object, and then if I go ahead and scrub it, it gets all jacked up, right? I mean, it's not really sticking to anything. I think it might be, yeah, it might be playing to the orientation of where we spawned everything. But anyways, what I'm going to go ahead and do though is I'm going to go ahead and select an add mode, and then I'm going to parent it to our null. So now it goes ahead and kicks it over to our orientation of the area right there, and it places it in 3D space, right? It looks really stupid and really weird right now. So if we need to go ahead and scale this bad boy down, let's go ahead and scale it to something like 5 right now. And then I'm going to select the position. Now you could fix all this, or the rotation. We could have fixed all this and fixed the null orientation back in Cinema 4D. You typically want the Z value facing up, I believe, in After Effects, but I'm gonna go ahead and select -90 here just to see if that works. Okay, cool. So we now have our, we've rotated our 3D object 90 degrees, and if I go ahead and run that through, it's sticking pretty dang good, right? Now here's what's cool is I could go ahead and just duplicate, you know, a bunch of these really quick, and then, you know, position, and then throw it up a little higher, and then do the same thing, position, throw that sucker up a little higher, and you create a little bit more depth in space. Now, if you animated all of that, you could make some really cool stuff, which you saw me post on my stories and on my Instagram. So anyways, if you don't have Edward's, you know, new pack, I would highly, you know, suggest to go pick that sucker up. But anyways, just a cool little trick to get all of your objects tracked in Cinema 4D, motion track all of your stuff, and bring in those 3D elements inside into After Effects. So if you guys want to see more of like the 3D side of things, let me know, but I think that this kind of covers it and gives you guys a good basis of knowledge for how to use the motion tracker in Cinema and then create all of your 3D elements and bring those things over. So alright guys, call this a disclaimer if you will, but I didn't feel like I covered the Cinema 4D style of the motion tracking and kind of what I do to get all of that stuff settled in. And again, one of the things that, one little last thing is with that null, if you do go in there and you'll rotate the Z-axis up, what do we have here? Let's see what we got. So the Z-axis needs to flip up -90 degrees this way. So let's see if we got this, and then see what we got. So the Z-axis is facing up now. So now if you were to save this file and bring it back into After Effects, your null would be facing upwards, so everything that you place in After Effects would be properly oriented. So just a quick tip and trick there. I'm gonna undo that because I don't usually do my tracking like that. I usually do everything inside of Cinema 4D and then bring over the renders to After Effects. So just to show you guys that process, the one thing that I didn't cover was to create a background and to use that JPEG sequence. So typically if you're using Octane render, you're gonna use a path tracing. I'm gonna down my samples. You know, I'm not going to cover all of this stuff, guys, but if you want to copy my settings, go for it. Diffuse 6, 500, 6, scatter depth 8, GI clamp, I drop that down. Alpha channel, select OK. Adaptive sampling, check on. And then I'm pretty much good to go to get a decent render pulled in the live viewer. So if I go ahead and select File, Save really quick, always save. If I select Octane and I hit OK, you're not going to see anything right now because there's no background set, right? So if I literally added that cube back here, and golly, the sizing on it. Okay, so I put the cube back in and I re-render this. The only thing that you're going to see is the actual cube with no background, so no referencing, right? So let's go ahead and pause Octane really quick, and we're going to get our background set up. So the first thing that I did was I go over here to this little icon here, and I select background. throw your background at the bottom layer, and then go down here into your materials panel and double click, create a new material, double click on that. You can turn the reflectance off, you don't really need to worry about it, but if you go into your color, we select our texture, select, back into our motion tracking tutorial and our JPEG sequence. This is where we're going to use our JPEG sequence. So click on the first image of your sequence, hit open, select no, and then go ahead and click on that image right there under texture. Select the animation panel right there at the top. Make sure you go down here to calculate. It's going to calculate all of the number of frames. And then go into your editor, select animate preview, and then select texture preview size. I usually like to set mine to like 2048 by 2048. You can adjust this based on the resolution that you want to see. It will slow down your preview, so just keep that in mind. So if you want to turn that down to like 1024, should be okay depending on your machine. So anyways, we've got that set. If you want to go ahead and take your material now and drag it to your background panel, and then go ahead and click File, Save, and then re-render your Octane viewer. There is our preview with our box in play. So if we were to kind of scrub our playhead forward and re-render, our box is sitting still. And now this is how I typically do all of my motion tracking inside of Cinema 4D. Now again, you're going to get that more realistic 3D element with the proper textures and the proper lighting and HDRI maps and whatnot. So just make sure that the sky's the limit at this point, guys. So I think that covers all of the Cinema 4D stuff for you guys. And you can create all of those different nulls, have a few different nulls that you bring over to After Effects that you use as tracking markers for different objects. That covers it. That should be it, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or leave some comments in there, and I will see you guys next time.